In October 2023, deep in the heart of the Appalachian wilderness, a lone tourist stumbled upon something that search teams had missed for more than 11 years. The forest was silent that morning, the air heavy with the scent of rain-soaked leaves and decaying wood. Following an overgrown path, the man came across an old wooden shed hidden beneath a tangle of vines and moss, a place that looked untouched since another time. Inside, his flashlight cut through the darkness, sweeping across a floor thick with dust and fallen pine needles. There, half buried beneath the debris, he noticed several strange objects: a rusted keychain shaped like a feather, a torn piece of blue fabric, and a weathered notebook whose cover had nearly disintegrated. It wasn't much, just fragments of someone's life, but to those who had waited more than a decade, they were the first real clues to a mystery that had haunted the mountains since 2012. This story began in October 2012. Daniel Reeves, 32, a software engineer, and his wife Hannah Reeves, 29, a high school history teacher, had planned one final adventure before the birth of their first child. They lived a quiet, content life in a small home outside Atlanta. Hannah, 6 months pregnant, had insisted that the trip would be short, just a few days along the southern stretch of the Appalachian Trail, where Georgia's dense forests blur into the misty borders of North Carolina. It was supposed to be their last free breath before parenthood, a chance to reconnect with nature, with each other, before their world changed forever. But the trail they chose was not like the ones Daniel used to hike. Locals said the deeper you went, the quieter it became. Too quiet. As if the forest itself were listening. Some warned them never to stay past sunset, when fog rolled in and swallowed the paths whole. They laughed at the warnings then. Young, in love, and full of plans, they believed they'd return by Monday morning. Instead, that weekend became the moment everything stopped. And it would take 11 long years before the forest, silent, patient, and unchanging, finally began to reveal what really happened to Daniel and Hannah Reeves. Before the forest took them, Daniel and Hannah Reeves lived an ordinary but deeply content life on the outskirts of Atlanta. Their small white house stood at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, framed by oak trees and the faint sound of crickets at night. It was the kind of place where nothing ever seemed to change, where neighbors waved from driveways, and the mail always came on time. Daniel worked remotely for a software company, his days spent in front of glowing screens and endless lines of code. He was calm, steady, and quietly optimistic, the kind of man who found joy in fixing things that others gave up on. Hannah often joked that his patience could outlast the seasons. Hannah, by contrast, lived in the rhythm of people. She taught history at a nearby high school, her classroom walls covered with maps and handwritten notes. Her students adored her for the way she made old stories feel alive, as if every lesson carried a heartbeat. Outside of school, she tended to her garden, kept a small journal, and often pressed wildflowers between its pages. When she discovered she was pregnant, Hannah began to see the world differently. Colors seemed warmer. Days felt slower. She started writing letters to their unborn son, tucked neatly inside a box labeled, "For when you're old enough." Daniel built the crib himself, sanding every edge smooth, humming softly while he worked late into the night. The idea for their hiking trip came one quiet evening that summer. They were sitting on the porch as the cicadas began their song, and Hannah mentioned how she wanted to see the autumn colors one last time before the baby arrived. Daniel smiled, saying he knew just the place, the southern ridges of the Appalachian Trail, a path he'd dreamed of hiking for years. At first, Hannah hesitated. 6 months pregnant, she worried about the strain, but her doctor assured her that she was healthy and strong, and Daniel promised to plan every step carefully. They would keep it short, 3 days, maybe 4, just enough to breathe the mountain air, take photographs, and make one last memory together before life changed forever. The weeks before the trip were filled with quiet anticipation. Daniel checked their gear twice over, marking waypoints on a worn map, while Hannah packed granola bars, a first aid kit, and her favorite blue scarf. She even bought a small camera to document their journey, "So we can show him someday," she said with a smile, resting a hand on her belly. On the morning they were set to leave, neighbors saw them loading their backpacks into the car. Hannah waved from the passenger seat, her face lit by the golden light of early autumn. Daniel closed the trunk, looked once toward their house, and then down the empty street. It was the 16th of October 2012, the last day anyone ever saw them alive. The morning of the 16th of October 2012 was cool and quiet, the kind of morning that felt like a promise. Mist curled low along the hills, drifting through the trees, as the Reeves silver SUV pulled into the gravel lot near the trailhead. The Appalachian air smelled of pine and damp earth, alive with the hush of an early autumn day. Daniel locked the car and adjusted his backpack. "You ready?" he asked gently, glancing toward Hannah. She smiled, tightening her scarf against the breeze. "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied, her voice light but steady. Their plan was simple: hike a 30-mile section over 3 days, camp along the way, and return by Sunday evening. Daniel had mapped every step carefully, choosing well-marked trails and areas with established shelters. For him, it was a long-awaited adventure. For Hannah, it was a farewell, one last walk before her world would shift entirely toward motherhood. A few hikers passing by that morning remembered seeing them. One man recalled Hannah laughing as she tried to balance her pack. Another mentioned Daniel helping her adjust the straps, his hand brushing her shoulder with quiet affection. Nothing about them seemed unusual. They were just another couple chasing the rhythm of the mountains. By noon, the fog lifted, revealing ridgelines bathed in gold. The pair moved steadily, stopping now and then to take photographs. Hannah posed beside trail markers. Daniel framed her silhouette against the vast rolling distance. She wrote a few quick notes in her small journal. "Beautiful light today. Feels like the world is holding its breath." That night, they set up camp near an old shelter known as Eagle's Rest, a wooden lean-to that had stood for decades beside a narrow stream. Another hiker who camped nearby later told investigators he heard them talking quietly inside their tent, the low murmur of 2 voices fading beneath the sound of rain. He fell asleep sometime after midnight. When he woke at dawn, their tent was gone. What happened between those hours has never been fully explained. The first sign that something was wrong came 2 days later when Daniel's younger brother realized they hadn't called as planned. The couple's phones went straight to voicemail. At first, everyone assumed they had simply lost signal common in that region. But when another day passed without a word, concern turned into panic. Rangers began a formal search on October 20. Dozens of volunteers combed through the area, guided by maps, scent dogs, and aerial drones. They found their campsite, half collapsed, with the remnants of a small fire still visible in the ash. Hannah's blue scarf lay near the stream, soaked and torn. A camera, its screen cracked, was discovered a few hundred yards away. Inside were several blurred photos, trees, rocks, shadows. The final image showed Daniel's hand reaching toward something indistinct at the edge of the frame. There were no footprints leading away from the site. No signs of struggle, no discarded gear. It was as if the forest had simply swallowed them whole. The search stretched for weeks, covering miles of rugged terrain. Locals joined in, bringing food and flashlights, hoping for any clue. Yet nothing else was ever found. By early November, the effort was scaled back. Winter was coming, and the mountain trails were growing dangerous. Daniel and Hannah Reeves, a couple full of plans, laughter, and the promise of new life, had vanished without a trace. And for more than a decade, the woods would keep their secret. In the days that followed their disappearance, the Appalachian foothills turned into a vast maze of flashing lights, search dogs, and voices calling their names into the cold wind. Every day, the rescue teams expanded their radius, combing through ravines, streams, and ridgelines that grew darker with each passing hour. Daniel's younger brother, Michael Reeves, flew in from Texas to join the search. He arrived with a duffel bag and a haunted look that seemed to deepen each time a ranger shook his head. Hannah's parents, Evelyn and Robert, drove up from Atlanta the same night. They stayed in a small roadside inn near the trailhead, unable to sleep, clinging to the faint hope that the next morning would bring news, any news. The days blurred together. Helicopters traced slow circles above the treetops, and volunteers trudged through mud that swallowed their boots. Flyers bearing Daniel and Hannah's faces were taped to trail posts, pinned to notice boards, even left under windshield wipers of passing cars. Yet the mountains remained silent. Then, on the fifth day, a small discovery renewed everyone's energy. A ranger found a damp notebook wedged between two rocks near a stream half a mile from Eagle's Rest. The cover was torn, but several pages were still legible. They were written in Hannah's familiar looping handwriting. One entry read, "Wind picking up tonight. Daniel's worried about the weather. I keep hearing something out there. Maybe the rain, maybe not. Trying not to let my mind wander." The final entry trailed off mid-sentence. For Evelyn, reading those words felt like stepping into her daughter's last thoughts. She held the pages to her chest and wept quietly while Daniel's brother stood beside her, staring into the trees. As weeks turned into months, the search shifted from hope to recovery. The rangers began calling it a cold trail, a phrase that sounded too clinical for something so human. Michael refused to leave, hiking alone long after official efforts had stopped. Locals warned him of the dangers: sudden drops, wildlife, disorienting fog, but he couldn't walk away. "If it were me," he told one ranger, "Daniel would still be out there looking." Winter arrived early that year. Snow covered the peaks, and the trail froze over in long, pale ribbons. Eventually, even the most determined volunteers had to turn back. The case of Daniel and Hannah Reeves faded from the headlines, replaced by new stories and newer tragedies. But for their families, time did not move forward. It only folded in on itself, trapping them in the same October evening, forever waiting for a door that would not open. Each year on the anniversary of their disappearance, Hannah's parents gathered near the trailhead with a small group of friends. They would light 2 candles and place them beside a framed photo of the couple, Hannah smiling in her wide-brimmed hat, Daniel's arm around her shoulders. The wind always seemed to rise just then, flickering the flames as though the forest itself was listening. Even after 11 years, Evelyn still wrote letters to her daughter. She placed them in the same box Hannah once used for her unborn son, the one labeled, "For when you're old enough." Only now, no one knew if anyone would ever read them. 11 years had passed since Daniel Reeves vanished into the fog of the Appalachian Trail, Georgia divided by North Carolina border, the same fog that had swallowed countless secrets before him. The town had changed, but the whispers never stopped. Locals still spoke about that family camping trip gone wrong, about how Daniel disappeared after searching for his wife, Hannah Reeves, who had wandered off near the ridge that morning. Some said he never left the forest. Others believed both were taken by something that couldn't be explained. Then, on a quiet autumn evening in 2022, a hiker named Mason Cole stopped at a roadside diner not far from that forest. He was tired, covered in dust, when he told the waitress he'd seen something strange, a man walking along the overgrown trail that led to the old ranger station. "He looked lost," Mason said, "like he didn't belong here. His clothes, outdated, and his face." He paused. He looked like someone who'd been gone a long, long time. When the sheriff's office followed up, they found faint tracks near the trail, along with a rusted compass engraved with the initials DR. It was the same compass Daniel's brother had given him before that 2011 trip. For investigators, it was the first tangible clue in over a decade. Soon after, motion-triggered cameras were set up in the area. On the third night, at 2:37 a.m., one of the cameras captured a figure standing at the tree line, a man with hollow eyes, a torn flannel shirt, and mud up to his knees. His expression was vacant, but behind him, a faint outline of another person seemed to flicker in the mist, the silhouette of a woman, motionless and watching. Authorities rushed to the scene, but by dawn, the trail was empty again. Only a few footprints remained, 2 sets, side by side leading deeper into the forest before vanishing near the creek where Hannah's scarf had been found years earlier. The footage was released to the public weeks later, and many dismissed it as a hoax. But those who knew the Reeves family couldn't look away. Daniel's mother wept as she recognized her son's face. "He's still searching," she whispered. "He's still looking for her." To this day, no one knows what really happened in those woods. Some believe Daniel and Hannah found each other and never wanted to leave. Others think something ancient keeps them there, bound to the forest, to the silence, to the night they vanished. When Mason Cole, the tourist who had seen the strange man near the Ranger Trail, was brought in for questioning, he didn't seem frightened. If anything, he looked unsettled. His hands shook as he tried to explain what he saw that day, though his voice carried a quiet certainty that no one could ignore. "It wasn't just a man," he said. "It was Daniel Reeves. I didn't know his name then, but I've seen his picture since. It was him exactly as he looked in those old newspaper photos. Same jacket, same compass on a chain around his neck, but his eyes, they weren't normal. He looked like someone who didn't know if he was alive or not." Mason described how he'd followed Daniel for nearly half a mile down the trail, calling out to him several times. But Daniel never turned around. "He walked like he was following someone," Mason recalled. "Like he could see a path I couldn't. And then he stopped by a tree and turned his head slightly, as if listening to someone whisper. After that, he just disappeared into the fog. One second he was there, the next, nothing." When investigators returned to that same spot days later, they discovered something chilling. Beneath the moss and roots of an old oak tree lay a small silver locket inside, 2 faded photos, one of Hannah Reeves, smiling softly, and the other of a young boy Daniel never got to meet. Hannah had been 3 months pregnant when she vanished. Few outside the family knew that detail. The locket's discovery changed everything. It suggested that Daniel might have known she was gone and had gone back into the forest to find her, refusing to leave until he did. Locals began revisiting old rumors. Stories about the ridge, where people claimed the forest holds memories, where echoes of the lost could still be heard if you listened long enough. And for the first time, Mason confessed something he hadn't told the sheriff before. "The night after I saw him," he whispered, "I stayed in a motel nearby. Around 3 a.m., I woke up because someone knocked on my door. When I opened it, no one was there. But on the ground, right outside my room, was a single photograph, a picture of Daniel and Hannah, standing together by a riverbank, the same river that runs through those woods. No fingerprints, no explanation, just a photograph that should not have existed." The photo now rests in a sealed evidence bag inside the sheriff's office, but those who've seen it all agree on one haunting detail. Both Daniel and Hannah appear to be smiling, but their eyes seem distant, as if they're looking at something behind the camera, something none of us can see. To this day, Mason says he never went back to the Appalachian Trail, Georgia divided by North Carolina border. But sometimes, when fog rolls across the highway and the forest hums in the distance, he swears he can still hear a man's voice calling a name, soft, desperate, and endless, echoing through the trees. After Mason Cole's story spread across the small towns near the Appalachian Trail, Georgia divided by North Carolina border, something changed in the air around the trail. Locals said it felt different, heavier, quieter, like the forest was holding its breath. The sheriff closed the case file once more, marking it unsolved, but everyone who had ever searched for Daniel and Hannah Reeves knew that nothing about it truly felt finished. Months later, a pair of hikers reported seeing 2 figures standing near the ridge at dawn. From a distance, they looked like a man and a woman, hand in hand, facing the mist that drifted above the trees. When the hikers called out, the figures didn't move. They just stood there until the fog swallowed them whole. No footprints were found, no signs of camping, just the faint scent of smoke and wet pine lingering in the air. For the Reeves family, time never healed the wound, it only taught them to live around it. Daniel's mother, now gray and frail, still keeps a porch light on every night. "In case he finds his way home," she once told a local reporter. But perhaps, in some quiet way, he already did. The locket found under the oak remains the most haunting reminder of what love can endure and what the wilderness can conceal. The small photo inside has faded now, but if you look closely under the light, you can still make out Hannah's smile, frozen in a moment that time could never return. Some believe Daniel never left the forest, that he became part of it, forever searching for the woman he loved and the life they lost. Others say Mason's story was just a trick of the fog, a weary traveler's imagination. But deep down, most locals don't need proof. The woods remember, they always do. And maybe that's the lesson buried beneath the tragedy of Daniel and Hannah Reeves. That love, once forged in devotion, doesn't simply end. It lingers in the quiet corners of the world, waiting, echoing, like a faint heartbeat under layers of time and earth. That some people are never truly gone, just somewhere else, watching over the paths they once walked. Every year, a few travelers still leave flowers near the trailhead where the Reeves couple's car was found, not because they expect answers, but because the story reminds them of something deeply human. How fragile our steps are in this vast, untamed world. And how, sometimes, the most haunting disappearances aren't the ones we read in the news, but the ones that never let go of our hearts. If you found this story haunting and want to hear more real-life mysteries like this, disappearances, strange discoveries, and the secrets time tried to hide, make sure to subscribe to Last Seen and turn on the notification bell. Because some stories are never truly over.